Okay, we are up. Ladies and gentlemen, and variations thereof, welcome to the Selectives Lorecast, a casual Elder Scrolls podcast. Today we're talking about the king in the Enantiomorph. Goody, goody, goody. My name is Rotten Deadite and Sifri, just subscribed with his Twitch Prime subscription. Welcome to the House of Wee, Sifri. My name's Rotten Deadite, and with me today are...
I'm Andrew, also known as The Right Gwar on Reddit and Sobekra Infidel on Twitch TV.
I'm James, also known as Aramithius on pretty much every single Elder Scrolls channel I touch.
Hi, I'm Michael, though you might know me on Reddit or other places as Scourgicus, and on PSN as Moon Sugar Leader. And I have terrible delay, so that I'm like 5 seconds behind everybody, and it's a little crazy.
We'll just be very patient. If only you had good things to say. If only you were really interesting. Well,
make us want to wait.
Yeah, that's not going to be a problem. So last session we talked about the thief, which is we're kind of doing this in order of difficulty. I think the thief is well documented, and a lot of people have talked about it, and it's a pretty easy concept to understand. The king is a little bit more difficult. The mage is fucking impossible, and that's where it ought to be. Again, for those of you who are new, and I don't think any of you are, but we'll do it anyway. The Enantiomorph is you could call it a mythical or plot structure that permeates the entirety of the Elder Scrolls series, possibly with the exception of Arena and Daggerfall, but they don't count. And the idea is that a thief attempts to steal or in some way interacts with or betrays the king, and this process is witnessed by the mage, and by and large, that's pretty much all the specifics you can get. Everything else after that is just variations on the theme. Michael just wandered back in. Hello.
Sorry about that. I think I'm with us all now. I think I'm here.
Oh, did you refresh? That was a good move. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, where do we want to start? What do we want to talk about first? Variations of the king. In what games? Let's go down the video games so we can kind of easily establish who's who in the video games, and that's where most people are familiar with. What is the king's who plays the king in Morrowind?
That would be the main quest. It would be Dagoth within the tribunal. It's Almalexia. If you're talking great houses, it's probably Redoran-ish. Or at least was at one point, and has all the kind of trappings of traditional monarchy and kingship and so on and so forth. That's all I can give you after a 5 seconds worth of thought.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure there are more. There's going to be. And if you're talking ruling kings who have no equivalent, the other edition of that is Tiber and Vivek and possibly Nerevar.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of want to argue that, but I'm sure we'll get to that. But yeah, that's it in terms of the king of the Enantiomorph relationship within Morrowind, at least that I can think of.
And for continuing points, the slightly more difficult question of who is the king in Oblivion.
We discussed this last week. I'm gonna stay stum.
I'm gonna guess. Martin, I guess, because of how he assumes that the avatar of Akatosh.
At the end.
Yeah, at the end. Spoilers. So I don't know.
Yeah. No, for most of the game, I would have said Dagon quite happily.
Mm-hmm. But you don't think it's Dagon?
Oh yeah, but by the end of the game, it's Martin. Probably.
I would
Stop making me-
have to say that the ruling king in Oblivion is Uriel Septim the Seventh, and he's killed.
Mm-hmm.
And that for most of the game there is not a ruling king. But by the end it's Martin.
Oh,
Well, actually, if you're going to drag me onto that topic, let's just jump again, because why should we maintain one? Why should we talk about any one thing for any 10 seconds? Not while I'm in charge, goddammit. Which is, is there a difference between the ruling king and the king in the Enantiomorph?
I would. Where are my notes on this? I think I want to say I think so. Simply because the ruling king seems to have much more in the way of concrete attributes. If we look at him from the sermon's perspective, it's things like in impersonal survival is not the way of the ruling king. He is armored head to toe in brilliant flame, redeemed by each act he undertakes, and so on and so forth. There's an awful lot more baggage attached to those notions rather than simply the one who either wins something or the one who has something and then loses it, which is the Enantiomorph king. So I'd see them as overlapping, but I don't really see them as the same thing.
Yeah, you could say that a ruling king might be the thief at the beginning of a plot line or something, or an interaction. But by the time it's over, the goal is for the ruling king to become the same thing as a king. And basically the sort of the shorthand here is that whoever in an Enantiomorph becomes the betrayee, the person who is betrayed, that would be the king. The person who is betraying someone would be the thief, who eventually becomes the king, usually. It is possible for, when you're doing this sort of the enantiomorphic plot line, it's possible for the thief to betray the king and then just fuck off. And and that's the end of the process. But generally speaking, the enantiomorphic structure encourages a cyclical structure. So the thief becomes the king, and then another thief comes along, or the ex-king who is now the thief becomes the the betrayer, and so forth and so on. Yeah. Or the mage decides to become the thief. It can be a lot of different things.
So I'm wondering if we're talking about Oblivion. And so Uriel Septim VII starts as the ruling king. He is killed by the mythic Dawn, who you could say is kind of an arm of Mehrunes Dagon. So Dagon in that scenario is the thief, becomes the king, and then the wheel turns, and now we've got Martin Septim taking that from Mehrunes Dagon. So
it's possible to dial it down even further and just think about things in terms of desire. In the case of Dagon, he's taking on the role of the thief because he is trying to steal what was once his back. Or is he? Yeah. So, okay, maybe not, because Mankar Cameron argues that Dagon is stealing back Nirn from the Daedra. Yeah. And as the inheritor of the domain of Lorecast. And that is also a very important thing to mention at this point, that it is possible to interpret the same events in multiple ways, depending on the standpoint, depending on who you are in the process, in the plot line, depending on your personal feelings about as how the story played out and stuff. This is all subjective, as everything is. So,
yeah. Just
go ahead.
Okay, it just kind of reminded me there that the idea of Dagon having Tamriel as his birthright. Certainly, if you go on to kind of beyond the point where kings and dukes would stab each other, and then anyone who could grab the crown would be king. The kingship and monarchy is something you're then born to. There's that kind of sense of entitlement, and if we can go to just disregard the sermons for a second because we're going to, you're kind of there's a statement that you are born the ruling king of the world. It's this idea of kind of having that entitlement within you, in that sort of sense.
Sure.
Which,
yeah, that's entirely possible. It doesn't really, like, kind of one of the principles of the ruling king from a philosophical standpoint isn't how it doesn't really matter how you became the ruling king. In fact, that almost doesn't have anything to do with being the ruling king at all. All that matters is that you are who you are. And just by being, the ruling king in nature and following that nature, you are the ruling king. It's one of those, it's one of those things like when I like to talk about in Sermon 18 about how Vivek realizes her nature and is dissatisfied with it. It's the reason why Z can never attain the nature that Z wants is because that nature would require her to not be dissatisfied. And that's just not possible.
No.
There's
So Sifri brought up in chat the definitions of the ruling king,
right,
and it's a perfect segue since you just brought up the sermons. In Sermon 11 is where we get a lot of information about the ruling king. Let's see, I've got Sermon 11 up here now. Vivek would always be there to advise him, and this is the first of the 3 lessons of the ruling kings. The ruling king that sees in another his equivalent rules nothing. The secret of weapons is this: they are the mercy seat. The secret of language is this: it is immobile. The ruling king is armored head to toe in brilliant flame. He is redeemed by each act he undertakes. His death is only a diagram back to the waking world. He sleeps the second. He sleeps the second way. The Sharma is his double, and therefore you wonder if you rule nothing. So that one line, the ruling king that sees in another his equivalent rules nothing. So it is the ultimate narcissistic, I am better than everyone. I am entitled to this. I am, and Kim can play into that. Kim, Chim, Chime, however you pronounce it. That can play into that because, okay, well, I am the Godhead. I am the dreamer. I am God. I am therefore above all of this, and I am the ruling king. This is my domain. I have control over all this. And so it's Vivek is so interesting in that way because there's so many different kind of slots that we can fit Vec into. As a thief, as a ruling king, could Vec be considered a mage at the same time? I know the red moment is chock full of enantiomorph upon enantiomorph. We got all kinds of stuff going on there. And so Vec in particular is very unique in that way. And so the fact that Z is talking about the ruling king in the Sermon 11, which has numerological implications, 11 being a number of mastery or a number of the master. Is that something we want to take a look at real quick?
The numerology of the 36 lessons? Sure. How much time you got? Hold on, let me pull up 29 real quick.
It might be worth noting, if memory serves me correctly, and it might not. In one of the sermons, and it might be the Sermon of Numbers, I can't remember. Number 11 is considered the inelegant number. 1 and 1. Yeah. How could you change it? How could you tell if either one of them had changed? I can't remember where that is. Chris, do you remember which sermon that is?
Not off the top of my head.
That's what would happen if they changed places? I can, and that's why you need me. That is sermon.
It's 11. Yeah.
Is that sermon 11?
Yeah, that is. Horse, Thor, and Sharmat, 1 and 1, 11, and an elegant number.
Because
so on and so forth.
Because I realize this is kind of meta, but we do that. I sometimes wonder if things like the Sermon of Numbers also apply to the actual sermons themselves.
How do you mean?
Oh yeah.
Well, let me see if I can find that. Hang on.
Yeah, there's an awful lot that you can mine out of the sermons by applying the titles of each of them, as given in the Scripture of Numbers to to the contents of the lessons. That's absolutely there. Although I would almost argue there's a difference between a king and a master, but I'll wait until Michael's finished his point before we go on to that. Yeah, unless it's going to take more than a few seconds. What are you looking for, Michael?
It's definitely going to take more than a few seconds. That's okay.
Okay. Okay. In which case, I'll kind of explain where I'm going with the idea of the 11. One and one, you're kind of you have them being these things kind of held in balance, which to me speaks of and then you've got Vivek saying, well, I can decide which one is which. That's Vivek outright declaring he is the observer in this particular enantiomorph. But it's also the idea of being able to hold these particular elements in balance and be between both and understand both. That kind of nature of duality is what kind of clicks for me with mastery, which isn't what the king does. The king wins. The king makes one and one just one, which isn't the balance between the two.
Well, that's
Yeah.
The idea of the ruling king, the king makes the one and one to just one, is interesting, and it's making me think. But I'm going to take some time to think a little bit more about that. But before I do, I wanted to mention that one of the reasons why 11 isn't an elegant number has to do with Vivek's conglomeration, I guess, or combination, I don't know what the right word is, of the number 1 and the letter I, and the you just exactly, James.
Yeah.
And thank you. And the way that and the importance of the word I, or the declaration of the word I.
Mm-hmm.
So the reason why why 11 isn't an elegant number is because it's two beings, two entities, both declaring their importance simultaneously.
Mm.
And the reason why this is dangerous is because because if both of these entities are ruling kings, or are just kings in general, then they both have an astronomical amount of power, and the conflict between the two of them is going to be destructive. And when you have, especially when you have an entity like Dagoth, who just dreams himself into people's bodies, you can end up in a situation where any conflict with Dagoth is going to be messy, is what I'm trying to get at, you know? So you have to a mad Enu on crack. That's yeah, right, Doc. That's exactly right. It's an organization gone completely. It's the organizational will gone completely insane. And when you do that, you get people stacking chairs on top of each other, and it's just a mess. So I don't think I don't think that it's necessary that can he not get in, Andrew?
Oh, I just wanted to make sure it was cool if we got him in here.
No, does he have the link? Give him the link.
All right.
It should be on the Facebook group.
Yeah.
Hashtag Bosmer love. Come on.
Yeah, right.
He's PMing me about it. So.
Yeah.
So okay, Chris, I have a crazy heretical idea. I don't know. This might be really out there, but
is it to do with Bosmer being ruling kings?
Yeah, well, okay. So I'm looking at this at Sermon 11, and you guys quoted it before, but I'll quote it again. Hortator and Sharmat, 1 and 1, 11, an inelegant number. I can't talk today. Which of the ones is more important? That's an interesting statement. Could you ever tell if they switch places? I can, and that is why you will need me. Vivek can tell which one switch places because Vivek is the witness.
You got it.
Yep.
So now this actually is extremely troublesome. It's troublesome and also fantastic. I have not played through the Clockwork City DLC for ESO yet, but I've seen enough to understand that there are some pretty serious shenanigans going on with Sotha Sil. And it is also really clear from the Tribunal DLC upon Morrowind that Amalexia is or perceives herself as the ruling king of the Tribunal. And Vivek definitely does appear to be the witness in that gigantic mess. Now, I mean, we could do probably 20 casts on the relationship between the Tribunal because yikes. But this, but
Yikes.
but this raises all manner of other interesting questions about other enantiomorphic relationships. Like we were talking about Oblivion, and who is the ruling king, who is the witness, who is the thief. And my argument, which I think we did kind of just briefly touch on, is that there's a ton of thieves who are trying to achieve kingship for various reasons, and that would include both Dagon and Mankar, who intend to mess each other over, and Martin. So who's the witness in Oblivion? Is it the champion of Cyrodiil?
That's what I suggest. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that would make sense, because you literally you kill one of the thieves, that being Mankar. Spoilers, and sorry if you haven't played it.
It's too late. Yeah,
it's like 11 years ago now. Oh look, 11 years. Haha. No, anyway.
Ooh.
But right, so you kill one of the thieves, and then you watch the combat between the two potential ruling kings. I don't know. I feel like I'm rambling, but this whole thing of it's these two sentences, or these three sentences. Which of the ones is the more important, Sharmat or Hortator? Could you ever tell if they switched places? And because it's that rebel king cycle, that whatever happens, it's always this. They're always changing places. The players may be different, but the concepts are always those two things. I don't know. I'm rambling.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm also reading chat right now. There's very interesting points being raised in there.
Yep.
Yeah, Vivek, Sotha does mention that Vivek wants to be everything. And that one of the things that probably infuriates Vivek in a way is how Sotha wants things and then achieves them, and isn't like. And it's not that Sotha's dissatisfied with them. It's just that these things happen, and then Sotha moves on to the next thing. And that's one of the things that I think Vivek has maybe struggling with, at least as Vivek's written in ESO, is the idea of somebody being... is not the idea of somebody being satisfied or dissatisfied, but in somebody not feeling either. You know? And that, I think, is one of the reasons why Sotha is more... in my opinion, more spiritually or philosophically advanced than even Vivek is. Because while Vivek's desire helped her to achieve all these amazing things like Chim and the 36 lessons and rewriting her background and all that stuff, it also limited Vivek because Vivek was never satisfied and was constantly desiring things. But Sotha Sil, I wouldn't necessarily say Sotha even exists in a state of constant satisfaction, although that might be, it might be possible to argue otherwise, and it might be a better argument. But right now where my head is at is that Sotha Sil does not really have the feeling of dissatisfaction or satisfaction, and that and that Sotha Sil is achieving what Sotha Sil achieves through the closest approximation of love under will, by just performing without, by performing work free from the lust of result. That Sotha Sil just does. Sotha Sil doesn't do what Sotha Sil does for Sotha Sil. Sotha Sil does what Sotha Sil does because Sotha Sil is Sotha Sil. To quote South Park.
You've touched on a point that I kind of wanted to raise that that goes into again from 711. He is redeemed by each act he undertakes.
Mm-hmm.
As a description of the ruling king.
Yeah.
My question for that, my thought that was kind of mulling around in my head is if I can get the words around, it's kind of almost a version of the Euthyphro dilemma words. Is a ruling king because they do certain things, or do they do certain things because they're a ruling king? So it's the idea of being redeemed by each action they undertake. Vivek is constantly doing stuff because he wants to be. Yes, I'm a king. I'm doing this and proving I'm a king. I'm doing this and I'm proving I'm a king. I'm doing this and I'm proving I'm a king. Or at least that might be Vivek's understanding of it. Whereas what you're saying for Sotha Sil is the act of being as an action is almost enough, or the act, or kind of inaction. It kind of goes back to what you said previously about enlightenment. There is no real difference between enlightenment and unenlightenment, if you like. But on the basis of outside observation, it just happens.
Right.
There is no action.
Yeah.
So
it's action through inaction.
Has Vivek gone into the stick here, or is Sotha Sil not a ruling king?
I don't think Sotha Sil is the ruling king because Sotha Sil's nature does not push him towards that area. It is possible to be like completely subsumed in your nature and doing work free from the lust of result and living an incredibly spiritually harmonized existence and not be the ruler of everything you oversee. You can just be I'll get back to that. You can just theoretically be, a gardener, and yet you're a gardener because that's just who you are and it's what you're doing, and that's why you're doing what you're doing. And the success that you experience is irrelevant because you don't desire success and so forth and so on. The argument of the ruling king, therefore, if you take the Nietzsche Übermensch kind of approach to it, is that even if a gardener was only a gardener and that's all that gardener did, and no one had ever heard of him and no one knew who he was or what he did, and all he was doing was just what he was put on this earth to do, then that gardener is a ruling king. And that gardener does rule everything that he oversees. Mm-hmm. But he doesn't know it and he doesn't care because he's almost like an idiot. He's almost like a child. Well, he's very much like a child, actually, in that he just does what that gardener does, just what that gardener does. And he does actually rule over everything that he oversees. But, I mean, it's, while everybody else does their bullshit, he's quietly sitting there being the very greatest human being that anybody has ever been, Oh, yes, if Sotha Sil knows nearly everything to the extent that he sees only limitations. He sees eventual degradation and failure of his plans, and he doesn't have the ambiguity in his thinking that he needs to allow for possibility. He's created a trap for himself unintentionally. He sees the nature of the trap, but not the way around it. Yeah, that's one of the things, Sif, that's one of the things that IFW dealt with better than I did. And it's a shame that he's not here today because IFW was very good at figuring out Anuvanasi in a way that I've not been able to get my head around yet. And it's one of the things that the main author, whose name will not stick in my head, of the guy who wrote that was the head writer for the Wheels. I almost said Wheels of Woe, for the Clockwork City. He really brought it home in the entire plot line, and I still don't really quite get it. and I think it's just because I just haven't put in the hours. If you follow me, I just have to sit down and focus.
Mm-hmm.
Is it Train Wiz? It probably is. um, I just assume that Train Wiz does everything.
He does a lot.
Yeah.
But,
Oh, somebody's microphone stopped working. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. You may need to disconnect and then reconnect. We'll still be here when you get back. There he is. So, anything? Nope, nothing. Yeah. Take your time, figure it out. We'll let you know when we hear you. Michael, I assume you're still here, right?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh,
I'm
okay,
here.
good.
I'm trying to put together. I never really put the time into looking at the Truth and Sequence books. Like I read them, but there's some pretty seriously heavy stuff going on in there, and I know that somehow applies to Sotha Sil in his nature as a potential ruling king, but I don't understand it enough to really be able to speak to it.
Yeah, I agree. That's been my problem as well. I don't quite have a grip on. I need to. It's hello.
Oh yeah.
There you are.
I have to use my crappy webcam microphone. I apologize.
Well, it happens. I have to spend time. Like that's really what the Truth and Sequence requires is just invested time. I mean, I was fortunate enough to spend hours and hours pouring through the 36 lessons for the Great Amaranth Hunt of 2000. But I don't. I haven't had that. I haven't had the ability to do that with the Truth and Sequence yet. So it's just something that's going to eventually happen, but I haven't done it yet. One of the significant differences between the two tantric paths, although both are under the aegis of Shiva, is that on the right-hand path, the adept always experiences someone above him, even at the highest level of realization. Yeah, because the right-hand path is submission. By contrast, the left-hand path pushes the path. The adept becomes the ultimate sovereign, or the world ruler. Yeah. And that is sort of like the reason why the left-hand path of mysticism was considered to be awful or abhorrent in early Christian metaphysics was because or early Judeo-Christian metaphysics, I should say, is because the left-hand path encourages you to be completely independent, whereas the right-hand path encouraged you to submit yourself to God. The interesting thing about the left-hand path is that increasingly, I'm beginning to come of the opinion that the left-hand path still requires you to submit to experience submission.
Say that one more time.
I think that I'm becoming increasingly of the opinion that the left-hand path still requires you to experience the act of submission.
How so? Like to your experiences?
I'm not sure yet. I like that's again, this is something that I'm working on. But I think the problem with when people talk about the left-hand path, it sounds egotistical. It sounds like, you've become the ruler and the most powerful and individualism and all this kind of stuff.
Could it be submission to one's own nature?
Well, that's the thing, is that you can't. It's like the philosophies that I'm reading and the religious studies that I'm reading seem to indicate that in order to become if you take Crowley's approach, if in order to become truly in touch with your internal, spirituality with the God that lives inside of you, you have to remove as much of the ego as you possibly can. And the way that Jung, for example, encourages that is to understand submission and submission to the will of someone else. And it's, for example, something that Vivek talks about in Sermon 21, maybe, or 30. I can't remember exactly. The sermon with the 31, the sermon with the black ink, when Vivek talks about learning self-control through her submission to Molag Bal, and that's. And Carl Jung talks a lot about learning submission to God in order to talk to God. So if it's the left-hand path that So if the right-hand path emphasizes against everything else, always living underneath, the almighty power of God, the left-hand path doesn't exactly tell you to shirk that either.
Yeah, it also ties into vaguely into the way I tend to think about truth in the Elder Scrolls, which is something I will go on about for hours. It's that you needed to learn submission to Molag Bal in order to how am I thinking about this? Because Molag Bal is linked to truth, and if you want to go to the ultimate truth of the way the Arabus works, you and it are the same thing. In order to shed everything and realize that you are that the universe is I, then you need to kind of go through that process and have that kind of beaten into you in a way, which is kind of why I think Molag Bal is the one that brings it up and is the one to do it, because expressing a truth and so on is a violent thing as far as Vivek's concerned.
Yeah, with the great hammering, so to speak.
Yes,
I think some people in chat are kind of heading in the direction that I've been heading in increasingly, which is that the right-hand path and the left-hand path seem to be diametrically opposed. But as with anything that is diametrically opposed, the true path involves bringing both hands, so to speak.
Right.
So it's entirely possible that what I'm beginning to detect is something that I'm sure someone else has already figured out before, but that
every fight.
Huh?
Bring both of yours to every fight.
Yeah, but cut them off when you stand before God, which again it is both the right and left-hand path. It doesn't matter which path you took. When you stand before God, they're completely useless because God has no need of theory and is clothed head to toe in terror.
And all you can do is hug.
And you just can't do it. And there's no point in action against the supreme being. And that's sort of like, I don't know, that feels about right to me. Like, as much as people talk about the left and right hand path and one being quote good and the other one being quote evil, and they're the people who are putting the quotes on there because they understand that doesn't really hold up. But the idea of one being, through whatever, it doesn't matter. The more I think about it, the more I like the idea of either one or the other of them eventually strays over to the other side. But what is actually happening is you're taking one path or the other path and then eventually just reaching the center again. And that you can't continue down, there's no end to the left or the right-hand path. Neither one of them have an ending. That's constructive, I should say. But rather, the only constructive ending to the left or right-hand path is where they both converge to be the same path. That's where the good ending is. Other one's bad ending. Middle one, good ending. The fact that I'm doing this is very interesting, by the way. I just subconsciously, I'm just beginning to realize that I'm doing this. And it's, yeah, that's an interesting symbol.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that got way deeper than I thought it would.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I was going to say another question that you kind of touched on Sunday of all times when I think it was when Vivek becomes a ruling king of the world, it links up to none of this. You kind of to set the scene for this in Sermon 4, he meets an old bone of the earth, and the line is that as at this the old bone folded unto itself 20 times until it became akin to milk, which Vivek drank, becoming a ruling king of the world. That doesn't match really anything of the lessons of ruling kings that he's talking about and the ways of thinking about what he's doing. That as far as I can see,
Right.
I would love to be proved wrong.
Well, I have
my kind of immediate insight. Well, just my kind of immediate insight into that is the thought that the ruling king is a start. If you look at the way that milk is the way that milk is represented in in Judeo-Christian scripture, it's always something that you give babies, and it's the start of something, which makes me think, is the ruling king an ongoing journey, as it were? But sorry that I completely cut you off.
that's exactly that. That's terrific. I actually asked Kirkbride about the milk symbolism in the 36 lessons, especially Vivek's line, we all drink the milk of our fathers. And he said it's just inheritance, it's DNA. It's cum. You know.
Right.
But
would that going back to the idea of that being inheritance, would that also suggest the sins of the father passed down to the sons?
Could do. I didn't ask about that, but
Yeah, unless you went to your mother first and deal with
thanks,
that.
Doc.
Right.
God damn it. And it just is. And one of the I think it's entirely I think it's entirely possible that that there could be an inheritance of responsibility. And that does make sense, considering, like, culturally it makes sense. But also, it makes sense from the idea of Vivek drinking the DNA or inheriting the spirit or whatever, the properties of a earthbone, in other words, an Daedra.
Yep.
I think that it's certainly possible that Vivek, at that point, as he mentions in, I think, that same sermon, is becoming responsible for more than anyone should be responsible for, and will endure more than can be endured, and so on. That does kind of line up with the Adric, concept of self-sacrifice and intentionally putting yourself in a torturous position for the gift of of one thing to another person.
Yep.
I don't think that we would be well served to start digging around in things like, well, which Daedra was it?
No.
I think that's probably a good way to get frustrated. But I am pretty sure that that the reason that this is one of those situations where the Daedra or the Earthbone is being referred to as more of a law of nature than an Daedra or a god of some personality or type.
Yeah.
So is Vec then equating herself to a force of nature? I am a force of nature. I am here. I'm going to do what I'm going to do. Therefore, I'm a ruling king.
Yeah, exactly. That Vivek is basically saying, I have attained the primal influence akin to that of a law, of a natural law. Vivek said that Z has much gravity, and that kind of fits with that,
So
weren't we talking about kings at one point? Welcome to the Selectives Ramblecast.
I did kind of want to take a step back.
Yeah.
But when you're making that that analogy to the gardener, you mentioned, okay, well the gardener is just doing what he does. He's doing his thing. He has a role, and that's it. And because he is true to his nature, as it were, or his job, or what have you, then that is what makes him a ruling king. So I couldn't help but wonder, when we talk about the Daedra princes, for example, the lay person will be like, oh, well, Molag Bal is evil and Aaron Dagon is evil. And many of us would be like, okay, well, no, the princes transcend that. They are beyond good and evil. They just are true to their nature. They do what they're going to do either way, while also being in control of their own domains. Would that make them, by definition, a ruling king?
Oh, absolutely. Of their own, of all that they survey, which is to say their Daedric realm.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I now, You could say that maybe the ruling king is only a title that you can assign to mortals because they exist in a realm of I'll put it to you this way: a Daedra, I would say, can't help but be anything but a ruling king or whatever they are. But a mortal runs the risk of every mortal on Nirn, except for arguably a few, are not ruling kings, and therefore it is possible for a mortal to not be one. You know what I mean? So
there's a point that Ferrix kind of put through in the chat. The Daedra are princes, not kings.
Yeah.
It's the idea of which it ultimately goes back to Lorcan's endeavor.
That bingo. Yeah. If Lorcan is the king, then the Daedra are the princes or inheritance of the king's realm, which is Mankar Cameron's argument.
It goes back to Mankar Cameron's thing, yes.
Yeah.
But it's also the idea of the Daedra are princes. Mortals are either subject or kings. That they have been brought low so they can be raised high. So that the mortal realm was created as an ascension factory, in essence. And so only mortals can do it.
That's kind of been my argument, right? That's what Mundus is for. It's an ascension factory. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, Ferric. That's kind of where there has to be something beyond purpose. Daedra can only be what they are. Mortals can transcend. Yeah, just because somebody has the potential to be a ruling king doesn't mean that they're going to be a ruling king. Because the most important aspect of this is that person has to be aware of themselves and aware of their destiny and what is required of them, and that a ruling king could live in ignorance of their destiny and never become a ruling king, even if that ruling king's destiny is to be, as I described, the gardener. If they don't have the ability to reach that level of spiritual enlightenment or complexity, then they're never going to reach that level of the ruling king. That's you could theoretically, I'm sure that people can start to argue in different directions of like, well, if a person is a ruling king, then they're destined to be a ruling king. They're going to be a ruling king. It doesn't really matter what they do. And in fact, the less they know, the better, because if they proceed through the whole thing completely ass ignorant of it, then they can't do it on purpose, which is a good thing. And my argument to that would be, I don't really have an argument. That's a really good argument.
So what would we call? And this is going to be a little bit of a departure, I guess. But what would we call Numidium? Would we call Numidium a ruling king simply for the fact that Numidium denies all others?
No, because he rules over nothing. That's his end goal. He is ultimately to be the only thing, whereas a king has subjects.
Well, let's say there's something in that 11th sermon. He sleeps the second way. The Sharma is his devil, and therefore you wonder if you rule nothing.
Yeah.
So then more of a link, perhaps, between Numidium and the Sharmat? Am I stretching here?
I would think so, because that was the idea of, well, if you have the ability to be challenged, then you're not necessarily the ruling king. Because the Enantiomorph hasn't resolved itself.
No, you can be challenged and defeat the challenge.
Okay.
In fact, I would say that probably a ruling king can't be a ruling king without challenge. But the ruling king will always win. If you see in another your equivalent, in other words, someone who can defeat you, then you are not the ruling king.
Yep. Yep. Yeah.
Like a metaphysical king of the hill.
Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit.
And that again goes back to is redeemed by each act they undertake. In smacking down everyone else, they are asserting who they are. And if they can't do that, then they're not.
Yeah, that actually sounds a little bit like sort of a Joseph Campbell concept, which is the idea that everything the hero does is inherently noble. That was that's what that line reminded me of. Was Joseph Campbell suggesting that in a properly structured story, everything the hero does, even if it seems awful is inherently noble because of a million reasons that Campbell could probably explain better than I could, I'm sure. But
Go
yeah.
ahead. So what I thought about with that is, so when we think of dragons, for example, dragons who aren't of mythic quality like Alduin, for example, they follow who is the strongest, the one who says, I am the hardest, right? And so using an assertion of what they are, like we see it in Skyrim, the dragons are brought back because Alduin is obviously the strongest of them, and they follow him for that reason. And so when we a fight between two dragons using their Thuum is simply a debate between two passionate parties. So I mean that's what made me think of. So I have to wonder how dragons fit into this whole thing, because now we can subgradients of Akatosh, and Akatosh being a part of the enantiomorphic structure. I get that, but dragons individually, as the shards of Akatosh that we largely accept them to be, I mean, what do we think about that?
Are dragons territorial? Is my gut feeling there, because we keep on talking about domains of ruling kings and being rulers of a particular area and such like. Do dragons have keep particular areas under their own control? I don't know whether we know enough about their social habits, if you like, but
it's hard to say. It seems like every once in a while playing Skyrim, at least, the developers were reading a lot of Nordic and relaying equivalent, or I should say related or similar cultures, the stories of dragons in those cultures. And one of the things you guys were talking about was one of the things that stuck out to me about old Nordic mythology and old Nordic myths about dragons was a story about a Nordic king who went out on a quest with his shield thanes and soldiers and friends to plunder and do whatever, and his obsession for gold turned him into a dragon.
Yep.
And it occurred to me while I was reading this that it may not have always been the truth for dragon mythology in Nordic cultures, but at some point, at least one author started to think about dragons as a metaphor more than a beast. And I wondered how much of that was going to end up in Skyrim. And I don't know, I'm not suggesting that it isn't in Skyrim, but I am suggesting that we didn't see any of it. But I am also suggesting that at one point or another, probably knowing the author, knowing the way that they write at Bethesda, there was some connections made between, some attempt to cast dragons as more of a metaphor than a beast of some kind. And when you start running into the realm of metaphor, you very quickly slam right into the enantiomorphic structure. So, in order to try to drag this back into on topic and to the point that you guys are trying to make, it seems as though you can draw a direct connection between a dragon and a king at that point. Because one of the characteristics of a king in the Enantiomorph is that the king has something to protect. And that was this Jarl's problem, is that he was so jealous of other people and so passionate about, protecting his gold that he had won, that he became a dragon. Similarly, so he, in other words, he built a tower and put his secret in a tower, and became the king. So the idea of dragons being characterized as greedy or possessive lines them right up with the king metaphor.
Yeah, and I would say that that's what's going on with Alduin.
Oh yes, of course. Yeah,
Yeah.
excellent point.
Because oh boy, I can't remember. There somewhere in there it talks about the dragons. Well, I guess Alduin's purpose, I guess, originally was to simply renew the Galpa, and then he decided, no, I'm going to rule this whole thing, and that's where he went off the tracks, and that's when he's sought to become the ruling king of the Mundus. At least that's what I would argue.
Yeah. And that's kind of the right. And that's probably the it's probably safe to say that in Skyrim, for example, the king is probably Alduin. Well,
see, Skyrim is weird.
Yeah.
Because you've got several gradients of relationships going on in Skyrim. I mean, almost from the beginning, you have the obvious Alduin, Last Dragonborn thing going on. Clearly, in that relationship, Alduin is the ruling king. But then you've also got this whole bizarre and enantiomorphic relationship between Tullius and Stormcloak.
Yeah.
Ulfric. And there's several subgradients of enantiomorphic relationships throughout that story, and I'm still not quite sure what they all mean together. Like I can hash them out pretty well individually, but I think there's and on some level there's that relationship between Man and Myr in the Empire and the Thalmor. And that game is filled. I mean, it is chock full of enantiomorphic relationships.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the in sum that it's saying, but I don't know. There's craziness going on in there.
I kind of want to say that just something that's just struck me, that because there's so much going on, there's no single thing that comes out of it. And you also have the prophecy of the Dragonborn, which talks about the snow tower or snow throat. I can't remember the precise wording. Being sundered and kingless and bleeding. That's possibly just purely a reference to Torrig being dead. But if you're saying that there's a multitude of enantiomorphs going on, that there's no one central focal point to it, in that sense, would that be a reasonable conclusion?
Yeah, that everybody wants to be king, or to do a slight paraphrase from that great movie Blade, some motherfucker is always trying to ice skate uphill.
Yeah.
Sorry, Wesley Snipes. # Blade love. But I wanted to, unless we want to go any further with dragons, I wanted to step back just briefly to Numidium. Because you all know that I love Numidium.
Yeah, we've got some good conversation going on about Numidium in the chat.
Yeah, and that's why I bring it back up. Usually, if something goes by, I just let it go. But because Numi's my boy, so there is in Sermon. Yeah, I'm a sucker for lost causes. Just that's me.
Go Underdog.
Underdog, yeah. Or is it Under Kings? Oh wait, I'll come back to that.
Hey.
Numidium is the Under King. Anyway, so Sermon 36. Let me see if I can find it here. I just had it. Give me a second. Here we go. Sermon 36. Dwemer High Priest Kagrenak then revealed that which he had built in the image of Vivek. It was.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, we got to talk about that. It was a walking star which burnt the armies of the Triune and destroyed the heartland of Veloth, creating the Inner Sea. Now, this next paragraph has massive shenanigans, and maybe doesn't deal exactly with what we're talking about now, but I'm going to throw it in there anyway. Each of the aspects of the Almsivi then rose up together, combining as one, there's your trinity, and showed the world the sixth path. Am took from the star, that is Numidium, its fire. Set took from it its mystery, and Vec took from it its feet, which had been constructed before the gift of Molag Bal, and destroyed in the manner of truth by a great hammering. When the soul of the Dwemer, that being Numidium, could walk no more, they were removed from this world. Now, we could probably spend about 6 hours just on that paragraph.
Yeah.
Because it really, when you read it, it completely throws off everything we know about the disappearance of the dwarves, because the timeline is different. And Sermon 36, the timeline of the Battle of Red Mountain, is really funky compared to everything else, and I don't know what to make of that, and that's why I'm waiting desperately, Chris, for you to come to this sermon in the New Whirling School.
Yeah.
But,
I hope you're patient.
yeah, I'm patient. I'm a patient man. But it's this going back to that first paragraph where it talks about Kagrenak, that Numidium was built in the image of Vivek, and we've already suggested that Vivek is the witness. Now, normally one would say, okay, that Numidium is like everybody trying to be the ruling king, and because he's in rebellion against literally everything. And you could argue that that Numidium becomes the ruling king after landfall. And there's this image in Coda where Numidium's hanging out up in outer space, and everybody's trying to beat him, and he just I keep saying he just keeps wrecking everybody. But if Vivek is the witness, what does that mean for Numidium? And then there was that whole idea of Numidium as Underking, which is...
But the Numidium in Coda is clearly the king, and Jubal is the thief.
I would say yes. And could this be a thing which, I argue all the time, that whatever Numidium was created to be is not what it became. And I would argue, and dear God, if you get me on this, we'll talk about this for days, because of what Almsivi did to Numidium, that they basically rewrote its Nimic and made it something less than what it was meant to be, because I think it was supposed to be something transcendent and beautiful and whatever. It all depends on what you think the dwarves were trying to accomplish.
Yeah, or they just gave it to Tiber.
Yeah, well, there's all that too. I mean, there's all this crazy stuff that happens with Numidium after this. That whatever it was probably designed to be some kind of crux of transcendence. That as I've argued in some of my crazy Coda stuff, that it gets victimized and brutalized by everybody. First by Almsivi, almost from the moment of its birth, and then by Tiber Septim, etc., etc., etc. And maybe that's kind of why it chooses the path of ruling king. Because it's like, fine, that's how you want to be. I break everything.
Yeah. Was it even meant to be? Was it even meant to be an it with its own decisions? That's if it really was. If we take Sermon 36 seriously, it being created in the image of Vivek, I would argue that Numidium in its original Nimic, or in its original Nimic, was intersex like Vivek. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then when Vivek takes from its feet, I think we've talked before about in Hebrew, in certain aspects in Hebrew scripture, that feet represent genitalia, that Vivek chopped off Numidium's feet, making it sexless.
Yeah.
Making it an it.
Yeah. Although I would almost argue that that's possibly Vivek potentially hiding his origins in that, going right back to the beginning of the sermons, the simulacrum of his mother. I read that as Numidium and all the stuff that the Dwemer are doing and mucking around with Red Mountain. The Dwemer do have a thing like Vivek because they're trying to make their own god, and they wind up being the same thing. Vivek merges with the simulacrum of his mother,
Right.
and becomes a god. And so, but if you go by the way that the distant priests and the conventional narrative tells it, you have the tribunal using the tools on the heart, which is in its way using part of Numidium to become what Vivek is. But yeah, as I say, that's possibly the opposite of what of potentially what you're arguing there. And I'm not sure entirely where I was going to go with that. Sorry, I just lost my thread.
No, it's okay. Things get really, when you start talking about Numidium, things get really murky because there's a lot. There's so much going on there. Go ahead.
I was also going to say that's another question. Is there any parallels? Is there any parallels between what the tribunal did to Numidium and what Vivek says he will do to Nerevar? The removal of the feet, removal of the face, genitals, all that stuff. You've got a comparison there between Numidium as prisoner potentially, but also if Nerevar is destined to be a ruling king or being trained to be a ruling king, you can also argue that doing all that stuff, Numidium did prepare it for that sort of a role.
Yes, I would agree completely that there is. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say I don't know if there's the one-to-one equivalent, so I need to look that up. Give me a second.
There's definitely some strong similarities there. Because what is it? They cut off Nerevar's face, they cut off Nerevar's feet, which could be genitalia in terms of mythic progeneration. But it's also in the sense then that Nerevar can come back as any race and any sex.
Yeah.
There's also that. There's a third thing, isn't there? I don't have foul murder.
Well, there's this face. Well, Vivek stabbed him through the heart.
Right.
So face, feet, and the stabbing. I think those are the three. Right?
That's the picture. But I can't remember what we get in the lessons, and searching the truth in the sequence won't do me any favors.
Yeah, I've got the image up here.
Yeah.
So what's the question?
Sorry. Yeah, I think we. I need to dig with this because it is going to bug me, and so I will duck out until I found it. Sorry, we probably need to talk through something else before we do that, or before we come back to that, because it needs to be found at this point. We probably need to move on to something else, otherwise we're just going to get a lot of silence and typing.
Well, I'm actually trying to figure out what it is that we need to talk about that we haven't already. We've been over pretty much all the major points that I wanted to raise about the king, and we've also talked about a million other things too, like we always do.
Just the nature of the beast at this point.
Well, I mean,
or the king.
The concept of a ruling king versus the king in the Enantiomorph. The advantage of a ruling king is that there's actually been quite a lot written about the ruling king, just in different terms. So, like I mentioned, Nietzsche's Übermensch, if you read on that, there's plenty to read about the Übermensch, and a lot of it is applicable to the ruling king. If you read a lot about the qualifications of a person who can reach Buddhist enlightenment, there's a lot in there. The Bhagavad Gita talks a lot about the actions of a true king. So thankfully, there's buckets of stuff written about this, and almost, to my knowledge, I haven't run across any that doesn't directly apply. So that's great news. Because it means I don't have to memorize it. I can just tell you people to go out and do it.
Something that's coming up in chat. I don't know if we want to keep going, but Nekin Alba brought up Khajiit culture. So how does the main, Michael, factor into the ruling king? What do you think?
If the main is a ruling king, I haven't read anything about the main that leads me to believe that the main is a ruling king in the Dunmer sense, in the Ubermensch sense. Michael, you're probably way better qualified to talk about this than I am.
Are you sure you want to open this door?
I'm 100% sure I do.
Okay. I'm gonna try to do this in a way that I don't spoil stuff from the Beyond Skyrim Elsewhere mod.
Yes, please.
The main is a virus that crops up in every Kalpa. So the people are going to ask for evidence. Okay, so so the Khajiit, and I would argue all the beast folk are different because they are not kings and thieves. They are, and I'm going to talk specifically about the Khajiit. We could talk about the Slodes or whatever, but I know the most about the Khajiit, so I'm going to go with that.
Mm-hmm.
They're portrayed as thieves, but really they're the witness. And because and I'm going to take this one from the Manamur schism, that Manamur are always rebelling king, and they're always trying to oust the other and whatnot. And the Khajiit are the witness, but in a sense, they're the witness who has already perceived the secret that's hidden in the tower, and that is to live, love, and have children. And it's the idea. Oh God, this is all. Why does this come up now? My brain. So it's this. Okay, so the main is not a ruling king, no, but the main has the secret of the Arbus, and the secret of the Arbus is love, because on the higher levels, Anu is struggling against his own shadow self, that is Padme, and that shadow self dichotomy plays itself through all the subgradients of the Arbus, all the way down to Tullius and Ulfric. Every single enantiomorphic relationship is based upon shadow self dichotomies. I would also argue it's about mimetic theory, but that's a subject for another time. The main is the solution to that. So the main doesn't seek to rule, but to heal. Maybe that's the quickest way to say it.
Okay. Right.
Okay.
I don't know if that made any sense. I was trying to take all of that.
It's not thesis and antithesis; it's synthesis.
Yeah.
Are we getting into the Khajiit? Are they antivirus of the Arbus? Is that what we're getting into?
Oh boy. I'd have to think about that. But they're the synthesizing force.
Mm.
So I would argue that they're not ruling kings.
Yeah.
It's in a way, it's almost like that. Okay, because when you're dealing with the main, we're talking about Ridthar Ridata, who was an historical main. There were a lot of other mains. In BSE, we're calling them the antecedent mains. But Ridata is the one who wrote Riddlethar, which is the religion of the Khajiit. And Riddlethar was designed to unite in Elsewhere, before it was known as Elsewhere. There were 16 tribes of Khajiit, and they lived in fairly good harmony because they based who was in charge upon the cycles of the moons. And then came the Thracian plague. Dadgummit, you slowed. But the Thracian plague wiped out all but 2 of the tribes. And that was the tribes of Anaquina in the north and Palatine in the south, or whatever their old names are. And the 2 of them, here you go, Rebel King, are in constant frustration and constant conflict, and there's just sadness. Ridata shows up and says, no, we can be one. And that's what Riddlethar accomplishes. It's the synthesis of the 2 into 1, or the acceptance of the all, or the many. And so in a sense, it diffuses the concept of rebel king and mimetic rivalry and all that stuff through. I don't know if you call it synthesis. Maybe it's mutuality.
Well, is it accepting inelegance? 1 and 1 is an inelegant number.
Say that one more time for me.
So if 11, 1 and 1 is an inelegant number, because one king is not being a ruling king for accepting an equal or a peer. If both Palatine and Necrona are I guess coming to agree that they are equals, then neither can be king, which is inelegant. According to the sermons.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm kind of choosing to misinterpret this.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Well,
Right.
and obviously Radata sees things much differently than Vivek, and that's neither that's not a judgment or anything like that. It's simply that they come from very different perspectives.
Mhm.
That Vivek is kind of immersed in this concept of reach heaven by violence, whereas I would argue, and some people might disagree, that the Khajiit perspective is rather receive heaven, or recognize that
Ooh.
heaven already exists here and now. Yeah, that's a good way. I like that. That's a good way of putting it. That heaven is already here and now, so all you have to do is receive the gift.
Although the pedant in me wants to say it doesn't, because a perfect place is always elsewhere.
There's so much I want to say. Oh. Yes. Well, and right, and so that's a great statement, because that statement was made by, and I can never remember, is it Kiergo and Dashita were the
Yeah.
the two rulers of Anaquin? There was a ruler of Anaquin and one of Palatine, and I can never remember which is which, but and or maybe it was the main who said it, Radata, that the perfect society is always elsewhere. And to me, I see that as dealing metaphysically with the problem of dissatisfaction. Yes, Vivek, I'm looking at you. And it's in its, maybe, I don't know, maybe the idea is that the Khajiit concept is about accepting the imperfect.
Yeah.
But in accepting the imperfect, recognizing its perfection. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Which also links back to what Andrew was saying. The kind of the it is that the acceptance of the 1 and 1, and maybe the 1 and the 1 and the 1 as well. But it's the kind of the acceptance of the plurality of ideas and being able to hold them together. There's part of me that wants to wonder what on earth the Thalmor and the Void Knights mean within all that, but that's a whole other kind of worms. But yeah, and I have had zero success in finding the bits where in the sermons where they pull various bits out of Nerevar, I'm afraid.
I don't.
My search foo is not good.
Is that? Wait a minute. Is that in? No. I don't. Is that? I don't think that's in the sermons, is it?
What are we talking about?
There was a kind of, and he must. I am the form he must acquire. Is in
Yes.
there. That's the key. That's the word I'm looking for. He comes as male and female. His hands are marked with the things with Gartok Pad Home.
Yeah, he comes as male or female, but I am the form he must acquire.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
But you've got his hands are marked with Gartok Pad Home. So you've got something happening with the hands. I don't think anything happens to his feet. But in regard to the Numidium, we have the fire taken from it, and the ruling king is armored head to toe in brilliant flame, which is an interesting one. Set took from it his mystery, and Vec took from it his feet. So yeah, I don't think there's a match up there for all the digging. Or at least if it is, it's not something I can easily point to within a few seconds. That's something that may take some work in order for it to make sense.
I do think though that there is definitely like a myth echo happening there. That this is that this in their ascendance. I'm gonna be controversial. Don't hate me. In their ascendance, the tribunal does some pretty shady stuff.
No.
Oh,
That's
You thought it-
controversial.
well, well, for some people, man. I mean, there's a lot of like tribunal fanboys out there. I mean, like if you say anything against the Dunmer, I mean, like look out. And I'm the guy like, I don't know, the Dunmer are kind of horrible.
I love
Are you talking
the
about me
tribunal
right now?
so much, but they are inherently flawed. They are the most dysfunctional family I've ever seen.
Well, and it's, I mean, you know, and here I go again, but I mean, we want to bring Azura into this and kind of that whole relationship. This is one of those areas where Kirkbride and I just really disagree, but that's okay. God bless him. But it's, I mean, it's such a mess, you know, that whatever it is that they thought that they were trying to achieve, and maybe it was simply that they wanted to be ruling kings. I don't know. That whatever it was that they were trying to achieve, they ended up destroying themselves. You know, that speech that Azura gives, is it at the end of Tribunal? Something to the effect of that mortals were not made to bear the burdens that the gods bear.
Yeah.
Something to that effect.
Mm-hmm.
It's, again, and I always say, you know, Vivek is one of the most tragic characters in modern literature, and that's probably true for the whole Tribunal.
Yeah,
Their story is a tragedy.
Yeah.
I think we all agree on that.
Well, have we covered everything?
I think we have. I wonder if we want to talk about, probably not, because I think we're getting pretty late here, but I wonder if at some juncture, maybe next time we'll talk about, I could talk about mimetic theory and mimetic doubles and all that kind of stuff and how that plays into the enantiomorphic relationship. Maybe we'll do that next time.
We might have to do that
of
during the mage cast, the witness cast, because so it's either going to be a very short or very vague cast. So it might be both. So we might need some fallback topics. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
there's already quantum theory, which is going to be dreadful.
Yeah.
Oh, it's going to be good. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. Is that the next one?
The mage is next. Yeah.
Okay, we can do.
So yeah, we'll do that one. The quantum theory one's going to be fun. I might wait until my dad's in town and then have him sit in on that because he's the nuclear physicist in the family. So
okay.
Also, Jonathan, we need Jonathan for that one too.
Okay. Yeah.
Hi.
True. All right, folks, that's going to wrap it up for today. Wait, weren't we talking about No, Pro Slider, that was a different cast. Kings was last week. Yeah. Yeah, debated. We will be back again in, are we doing this monthly or James?
Yeah, if that's what people do. I don't know whether we're going to be doing it on a particular week of the month, simply because things like Easter and whatever, particularly this time of year. But yeah, I'll sling something up in the group and people can say it's terrible.
Yeah. Well, when we come to a good date, I'll do my best to try to announce it before a half an hour before we start.
Yeah.
And every 2 weeks, maybe we'll see what we can do, Farrick. We'll see what we can do.
Yeah, that's what we did for this one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah,
the last one was
but it
2 weeks
also
ago.
falls over the month boundary, so yeah, whichever way you want.
Oh, that's a good point too. Yeah. Well, yeah, we'll see what we can do, Farrick. I kind of like the idea of every 2 weeks. It keeps us honest,
Yeah.
If we can stay on a schedule, then that's nice. So we'll try for the week after next, and yeah. And I want to thank all my guests today for showing up. This was a good one. I want to thank you. I want to definitely want to thank all of the new subs and followers today. And I will see everybody tomorrow for some more Morrowind. Is anybody working on it? Michael, plug your mod real quick.
Oh, so for those of you who didn't know, there is a major modding group called Beyond Skyrim, and their plan is to make mods for every other province in Tamriel. So, Valenwood, actually, I don't think Valenwood's in production right now, but there's the one that I work with is for Elsewhere, the land of the Khajiit, and it is looking amazing. I do not know when it'll be out, but the artists that we have working on this mod are beyond outstanding. You'll see all 16 first stocks. We have actual Tagra language that will be spoken in the mod. And I'm writing the main quest, so there will be shenanigans.
Yeah.
It's going to be a lot of fun.
Is there a website that people can go to, somewhere they can contribute?
Okay,
donate?
so yeah, there is. Oh no, of course I don't have all these up, but yeah, Google Beyond Skyrim elsewhere. There is the Beyond Skyrim website, which I want to say is beyondskyrim.org, but I could be wrong. Check on Facebook as well. Just Google Beyond Skyrim, and all the information will be there. But we have the main website, and where you can also, if you're interested in being a writer or an artist or whatever, you can apply and join on our Discord.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, we'll see everybody. I'll see most of you guys tomorrow, and thanks for showing up. Bye-bye.
Bye.
One of those.